the need to get the talent equation right, to get the CEO right, is getting exponentially more important. So you're almost looking for two things at the same time. Someone who brings analog experience, can speak the same language, can get off to a fast start, but can also be agile and learn and grow in the role. That focus has shifted to now starting to imagine new ways of connecting information and fact patterns in ways that we haven't historically been able to do. This is one of the most exciting moments for our profession. I would say talent and leadership is becoming a bigger lever for value creation than ever before.
Folks, we have a special treat today. We have Jordan Brugg, CEO of Spencer Stuart, join us. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to speak with us.
My pleasure.
So first of all, how are you?
Doing well. Doing great. Thank you.
Instead of me talking about people's careers and introducing them, I like my guests to introduce themselves. So I would love for you to give us a brief whistle tour of your career.
Okay. All right. Okay. Very good. Well, my career has been fairly straightforward in that the entirety of my professional experience has been at Spencer Stuart. And so, I have grown up, as one could say, inside of the firm that I now have the privilege to lead. And that's been a 24, 25-year journey, which started as even before that, actually, even as a summer intern, while I was in my undergraduate program. I suppose it could be 24, 25 plus and more if I include some summer experiences into the mix. But the journey inside of Spencer Stuart has been, multidimensional. It's been several different offices. It's involved different office startups. It's involved new practice areas, new service lines. And so when I think about my career experience, it's almost followed the same trajectory as the firm. As the firm grew either geographically or diversified its service lines or expanded its practice areas, it provided and created opportunities for me to lean in, both as a contributor and as someone doing the work and helping others, as well as someone who had an opportunity to lead. If I broke my career down into chapters, I would say, chapter one was really kind of an apprenticeship, where I worked with some great leaders. I worked with some great client practitioners, and I learned how to do our work. And helped them be successful, helped our clients be successful through that work. Chapter two was primarily an opportunity for me to lead my own client engagements and build client relationships of my own and represent Spencer Stuart as a sort of a client architect and team builder around client engagements. So chapter two is much more about me establishing, my expertise as a client practitioner doing client work. And then chapter three was leadership for different aspects of work happening around the firm. And most of that was client-facing, market-facing leadership, but it gave me a really great opportunity to evolve the ways that Spencer Stuart both did work, like how we delivered, as well as new service lines, new service areas.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of early into chapter four, having, almost 2 years under my belt as our managing partner, but hopefully it's just the early days of chapter 4.
Absolutely. It's almost unheard of when I talk to other people in other industries that someone spent 2 decades at a firm. But I'm starting to notice a pattern at Spencer Stuart, where a lot of people have been here for a very long time and done phenomenally well. So can you talk a little bit about what kept you here at Spencer Stuart?
So this is a subject that, I can embarrass myself on because I can get emotional about it, but it is absolutely the people. That sounds cliche, but I've just developed incredible friendships. And that started early in my experience, and it was both with peers. At first it was really with peers, and I just felt that there was a consistency of quality. And when I say quality, I mean the value systems, the beliefs, the level of care that people had in one another, I think is unique and special. And over time, I found that those friendships started translating into people who were really mentors. And those individuals wanted me to succeed.
Yeah.
And it wasn't benevolent in that, I was working tirelessly to ensure they were successful too.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to exploit that. They wanted me to win alongside of them. And they truly cared about developing a next generation for the firm. And so, number one, the people, I've just felt highly motivated. I don't want to let them down. I want to make them proud. And over time, you start to find, or I've started to find that I was reciprocating sometimes without even knowing it. A lot of my closest friends and most trusted friends in the firm are people who I've been a mentor to. And I care about their well-being and their professional, financial success.
Yeah.
Outside of the people, I also think that Spencer Stuart is a place where the standards of excellence are high. The ambition level is high. We're a very, I think we're a very professionally operated firm, and yet at the same time, you can still be an entrepreneur. And I think that is something that also kept me here for as long as it has. Every time I had an idea, something that I wanted to see us try, I could find enough stakeholders to, so long as the idea could prove itself out as decent, people were willing to invest their time and energy to explore and to do and to try. And so I have been amazed by the innovation that Spencer Stuart enables and seeks out. It's just not innovation that's done in a vacuum. And that is, I think, unique cultural element of the firm. If what you're doing is good for the client, if what you're trying to do is good for the firm, people will rally behind you and enable you to go out and try and build and do. And so when I use the word entrepreneurialism, I'm not really referring to individualism. It's more collective entrepreneurialism. How do we connect ideas, fact patterns, suggestions? How do you organize groups of people around those things to improve the work that we're doing for clients, to improve the work we're trying to do as a firm? And if you're operating with that kind of mindset, it's a place where you can continuously reinvent and create.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome, Jordan. So besides, spending that much time, there was also continuous progression in your career, right? As you mentioned, the different phases. Not everybody gets to do that. So because, they maybe don't have the right ingredients or they're not working hard enough. For you, could you highlight, maybe the 2 or 3 inflection points in your career where you said there was a jump up because you achieved that? This is so that, other younger people getting into executive search can learn from this.
There are several moments in time in my career where I feel like I've had those kind of those pivot moments, or there's been a catalyst to something that's occurred. I'll cite a few. One is, I think one of the key things that I've found both at Spencer Stuart, but I've also found this with my friends, my clients of my professional relationships outside of Spencer Stuart. When you bring your social network and your relationship ecosystem into the things that you're trying to solve, I've always been amazed at and pleasantly surprised by what I get out of that. And let me, just bring that to life in a small way with something early in my career. When I was maybe 3 or 4 years into Spencer Stuart, I was contemplating doing something different. I won't. I won't.
You won't tell it.
Exactly. And I started to share openly with some key colleagues what I was thinking about. And, it wasn't driven by a desire to leave Spencer Stuart. It wasn't, my intent was always wanting to do well for the people I worked with and for.
Yeah.
But I wanted my own aspirations and goals to align with the firm's aspirations and goals. And if that wasn't going to align, then, just to have a mature understanding of that and be planful and thoughtful in partnership with my colleagues around what that would mean and look like.
Right.
And as a result of that, it actually opened up new opportunities inside of Spencer Stuart. And I started having conversations that were being brought to me proactively around other things that might make sense, not just for me, but also for the firm.
Yeah.
And so one of the early kind of life lessons that I had there was like not to assume just because I'm working so hard and doing so much, doesn't mean that my interests are on the top of everyone else's mind. Everyone else is busy. Everyone else is working hard and trying to get things done. But by creating a mature conversation, by bringing some people into my thinking, it created a more open collaboration that led to some internal opportunities that I don't think would have otherwise come about. So that was one. So that lesson has stayed with me for a long time. I mean, I continue to practice that, and I also coach other people to find ways to create that kind of productive partnership dialogue. Similarly, I learned a hard lesson kind of mid-career here where I look back at it now and I think it was funny. At the time, it was not funny, which was I had a year where I had what I would call an abysmal performance review.
Okay.
And I've shared this story maybe in one other setting.
Okay. This is great.
Yeah, it was an abysmal performance review. And, actually it was so bad that it was clear to me that I might have been, I thought maybe in the review there, I was getting fired. I mean, it was like, it was not a good review. And the irony was that year I had worked harder, maybe almost any year up until my current role. I I had poured myself into, it was the opening of a new office. It was the start of a new practice. We had started our education social impact practice. We had no coding in our database for the executives that we were tracking.
Wow.
There was a ton of hard work that was sort of unnoticed, unseen. And I hadn't been communicating with anyone on what I was doing. This was another kind of early lesson where, I had been doing that work assuming that everyone saw the value and the need. And, kind of I got to the end of the year and people were sort of like, hey, what have you been doing the whole year? And so without getting into more of the detail as to what I did and what the perception was, a big lesson for me there was, how do you share what you're working on without it coming across as bragging or looking for a promotion? I wasn't looking for anything in return.
Yeah.
But I hadn't done any public relations or education. And so people didn't know what was being created and how valuable it would be to them. Years later, the value of that work became more clear.
Yeah.
But that was another moment for me to professional lesson that I learned the hard way. The other, I guess, sort of maybe catalytic moments were, there's a couple of others. So one other was, can I give you a couple more? I got a couple more. I got a couple of good ones. All right. So one other was really great words of wisdom from our former managing partner and former chair, who basically gave me the same advice that we would give our clients, but I hadn't really taken it to heart the same way. I hadn't internalized it, I guess, the same way that I needed to, which was I was never going to be able to really enable myself to do more within my firm if I didn't have my own successor. And to his credit, this mentor created a little file for me. And when we would meet almost quarterly to review kind of how I was doing in my work, how I was doing against my goals and objectives, for whatever reason, we named the file Project Snakebite. We would refer to it frequently. He would always say, "How's your succession coming? Who's your successors? Where are they? What are they doing?" And that started a process for me. I started to take very seriously, and that was when I was looking after Spencer Stuart's industrial practice. And there was a lot of great colleagues that could have been my successor, but I really spent time. So after about 5 or 6 years of leading that practice, we eventually moved to a co-leadership structure, and then following that, named a successor to the practice. In hindsight, it led to a whole host of things that I couldn't have predicted. Once I had that succession in place, I can remember speaking to the CEO, Spencer Stuart, at the time, and he said, "Well, what are you going to do now?"
Yeah.
And I said, no, you don't get it. I'm going back to client work.
Right.
And I'm really happy with the work I did for the practice. And I'm really excited for this succession, and we've got a great team, and I feel great.
Yeah.
And I took the bait next because he said, "Well, if you were to do something, what would it be?
Right.
What would you do?" And I said, "Well, okay, if I were to do something," and I wrote out a little vision for what I thought we should be doing in private equity. That, which I didn't know it at the time, that led to my being asked to lead Spencer Stuart's global private equity business. But that door wouldn't have opened if I hadn't had my succession. And it was, I had no real ambition or strategic plan to do something next. But, it was a special lesson too for me, which is, we're doing the right thing. We're creating the right value for the business, setting up others for success. And, because, that opened new doors that otherwise wouldn't have been opened.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
On the private equity front, what did you see in the market that you thought that maybe specialization for private equity as a practice should exist?
What I observe, and it's not just for private equity, but when I think about different business models, when I think about different operating contexts, when I think about different ownership structures, different goals and objectives of clients depending on their mission or their vision, I have come to believe that we can and should deliver the same services in different ways for those different clients. That has nothing to do with Spencer Stuart's interests. That has everything to do with aligning the way work happens for specific client needs, specific client behaviors, and for specific client outcomes. So private equity is an example of this, where its unique way of operating, its time horizons for investments, its clear mandate around the value creation plans that they have. The nature of our work could be designed in a way that is suited to their speed, their cadence, and their objectives. So premise one is design the way we deliver our services in unique ways around client operating model, client context, and desired client outcomes. Second was a realization, having spent a lot of time serving private equity clients, that most of our profession at the time, this is now going back 7 years, but at the time, most of our profession was serving private equity clients when a need arose.
Right.
So, they had a problem, they identified a situation, they'd pick up the phone and call, we'd respond to that specific need. And almost all of the time, those situations would be in a company they already owned. Listening to our clients, one of the things that became apparent was they had talent needs that were much more holistic and often started well before they actually owned an asset. They needed diligence on management teams. They were using executive talent to get smart on investments and investment thesis. They were using leadership as a competitive advantage in so many other activities. And no one in our profession was addressing that need. And one client described it to me very elegantly. She said, "Hey, Jordan, you're like looking at an iceberg where your entire industry is serving the tip of the iceberg, which you all can see. If you go below the water, the iceberg is enormous,
right?
And you're not helping us address all of those other needs." So, the strategy that we developed was basically developed with the voice of our clients in mind, which was, how do we start taking more of our firm's assets, capabilities, and people and applying it to a broader set of leadership needs that at the time our profession wasn't addressing.
Yeah.
So in a lot of the things that we created, I think we were an early mover in terms of working with clients pre-deal,
Right.
And working with clients outside of a transaction. Some creating new services that were specifically designed around whether that's diligence, whether that is pre-deal executive introductions, whether that's doing unique work for operating partners and value, creation teams. And so there's a lot of elements that went into our offering.
That's awesome.
And I would say on the human capital side, where we've been expanding more over the more recent years, has been how do we help private equity clients doing organizational design? How do we help them with the assessment of their leadership teams, not just for selection, but also for development? So how do we help portfolio companies or new investments? How do we help those management teams accelerate their performance, both in terms of aligning culture to strategy and ensuring effective team dynamic? A lot of it is also stakeholder alignment.
Right.
Oftentimes we're getting involved in helping management teams adjust to a new set of expectations.
Right.
New timetables, new refresh on their operating agenda, or even linking the strategy and operating agenda to the talent agenda.
Yeah.
And what's going to be needed in order for that investment to reach its investment objectives or surpass its investment objectives. So the services and the ways that we're working with the sponsor community has completely transformed over the last 7 years.
Yeah. And clearly it's the business line is doing fantastically well for Spencer Stuart. It's a big chunk of the business now. And you guys are really well known in that. But take me back to when you were starting out. Executive search, as we know, is very coin operated. My apologies. You're working on a search, you get paid for that search. The amount is determined. You already know how to charge for that. Now you're being asked to do pre-deal work and the structure's not clear as to how am I going to get paid for this, right? So there's potentially internal resistance, and also how do you talk to the client about the time that you're spending on that? I'm assuming there's a lot of risk that you're taking up front. It's potentially a loss that you're showing on the books initially with the time spent. So can you walk me through going back, what did you have to do internally to make a business case for it? And then also, how did you use that to further engage with other clients?
Sure. Great questions. Well, first thing I would point out to is we did rely on and continue to rely on having clients that we do have a lot of trust, developed and built with over many years. And so there are a number of clients who I would say we're very comfortable risk sharing with, and we've built real partnerships with, and that is not just something that Spencer Stuart can control. That takes two parties.
Absolutely.
And so I do feel as though the private equity sponsors that are willing to invest in creating partnerships with their go-to outside parties that I think that they can benefit significantly. They'll get more risk sharing. They'll get more discretionary energy. They'll get teams of people who are willing to align themselves around their needs. And I've been, actually, I think despite many outsiders sometimes criticizing private equity for being transactional because the nature of the business is transactional, I've actually found many private equity firms to understand the relationship business and the partnership business much more so than people give private equity firms credit for. And so I think it's fair to say we do client selection. We are looking for firms that will invest in us, but also expect us to invest in them.
Yeah.
And I think we've created a lot of value with those firms over the years. Secondly, the ways of working inside of Spencer Stuart or any, I'd say larger professional services firm, you do need to align the energy of your colleagues around concepts. And I have seen many professional services firms, at least from the outside in, or client organizations that I've served, or friends of mine that are at other institutions.
Yeah.
I've seen them struggle with, and even to be critical of Spencer Stuart, I've seen us at different moments in our history struggle with good ideas that just don't get the kind of energy alignment required to be successful. And in the case that you asked about in private equity, we had the support of our CEO. We had the support of our board. We took a lot of time and energy to socialize concepts with groups of client leaders. And so it was a team and shared effort around taking something that we saw working well with certain parts of the firm and made appealed to the logic and energy of the organization to align around certain new concepts and trying some new things.
Yeah.
It goes back to actually the career lesson that you asked me about earlier. And I'm applying these early learnings to, am I doing what's right for the client? Am I doing what's right for the firm? Am I communicating and aligning the energy of others around market concepts and client concepts? And we rallied behind it.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. It's because some of these investments take years to pay off, right? Like years. So to have the patience as a professional services firm, do you think being a large company like Spencer Stuart, having that leverage is the competitive advantage versus a smaller firm that can maybe never have, a runway of 7 years to have lost leader services until they start getting a profit? Do you think that there's benefits there?
I can't comment on some of the other operating environments that some listeners may find themselves in. But I can tell you that I do believe one of our many advantages and sources of strength is the ability to make long-term investments and long-term decisions. We can operate in a geography for 40 years and knowing that it's a long-term bet.
Yeah.
We're there to build important relationships at the very top of those economies and markets, and that those leaders can count on us. We're committed. We're not going anywhere. We can make those same investments in technology, where we have a long-term view, and can stay the course on things that we think are going to make a big impact to enable our people and to support our client efforts. So I think our financial position, I've heard, Jamie Dimon and others talk about having like a fortress balance sheet. Our financial position is incredibly strong.
Yeah.
And the partnership cares very deeply about reinvesting in the future. And the combination of those two things create a very powerful advantage.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So still staying on the subject of private equity, how do you think the market is changing? How is private equity changing in terms of investment style from, say, 10 years ago to now? And how has that led to you changing the services that you offer to the private equity segment?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer this for PE. I can talk about, what we're seeing across, all client categories. The market this is one of the most, I think, exciting moments for our profession. We have been experiencing over the last decade, probably more change in client expectation and in market need than we had in the prior 60 years of Spencer Stuart existing. And part of the reason for being that dramatic about it isn't just about the changes themselves. It's also the speed at which things are moving. Now, some of that is certainly technology. Some of that is certainly technology driven, but I saw a lot of changes even starting to happen before everyone was talking about AI. So, the last 10 years has created some pretty significant shifts. We're seeing certainly AI is, a topic that dominates. I would have to say, I could talk about consumer demand. Behavior patterns in the way consumers get goods and services certainly translates into how clients expect to receive goods and services.
Yeah.
We're seeing consolidation. We're seeing private equity move into our profession. We are seeing internal recruiting and internal talent teams becoming their needs shifting and changing based on their own internal capabilities and developments. We are seeing the problems that companies are trying to solve being much more multidisciplinary. And so a growing recognition that it's not just a single leader, but it's the ecosystem that leader is operating in. And there's a lot more team dynamic and multi-leader needs that are emerging in order for companies to drive the kind of outcomes they're trying to drive. And so I could give you more of the list of the things that are creating new dynamics.
Yeah.
All of those elements create opportunity. And in some cases, it creates new competitors. But what I love most is that their clients' needs are becoming, I would say, talent and leadership is becoming a bigger lever for value creation than ever before.
Yeah.
And as the client needs are becoming more sophisticated, their expectation of what they need from us is getting greater and greater. And I think that that's going to actually enhance our profession.
Yeah.
And help force us into areas where we needed to go anyhow as an industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jordan, you've done a lot of CEO work and you've done private equity work. I want to combine two questions sort of together.
Okay.
So private equity, what we've seen in the last 10 years, has emerged as one of the best performing asset classes.
Yeah.
How much do you think the credit of placing good CEOs, how much of private equity as a good asset class, as one of the best performing asset class, having a great CEO in a private equity firm, what percentage, what part does that play?
Well, I think most of my clients that I've worked with for a long time would tell me that over the course of their careers, they've had a growing recognition of that being a major factor. And most of the sponsors would tell me that their industries, their professions are getting harder and harder. And achieving the same returns over the same hold durations is getting harder and harder.
Yeah.
And so their need to do more with an investment over their ownership period is accelerating. And as a result of that, the need to get the talent equation right, to get the CEO right, is getting exponentially more important.
Yeah.
So, I think two things are true. One, having the right leader, having the right CEO has been something that the private equity industry has recognized for a long time. And they've put a lot of value on that. Two, their work is getting harder and harder. And so the leadership equation is only getting more important.
Talk to me a little bit about the private equity CEO. Is that a different class? Is that a different beast? And how is it different than, a public company CEO maybe?
I think there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. And actually, the two can learn quite a bit from one another. And there haven't been the number of CEOs that have run both. I've done some analysis on this and had some really interesting insights from CEOs who have been both PE backed and public company CEOs.
Yeah,
and some of the lessons they've drawn from that. Every CEO search that I have done is unique. And when I think about the culture of the organization, when I think about the culture of the sponsor, when I think about, what are the expectations of the ownership group and the direct investors that are sitting on the governance of that investment, when I think about the strategy or the value creation plan for that investment. And so there's a lot of factors that go into an environmental that then shape, okay, what CEO are we looking for? What CEO do you need in that situation? I think one of the assumptions that people make is, well, if you've been in this environment before, you've been successful, that therefore you will be successful again. Unfortunately, that assumption is in our our experience is not true. And what you're really trying to understand is all of the different variables that are actually new. Sometimes it's a different team, right? That CEO is going to be working with. Sometimes there's different competitive dynamics. You've got to factor in all sorts of things like motivation, and so it's sometimes a false, trap.
Yeah.
To assume that. That being said, you can isolate certain fact patterns that will be similar. And you can find experiences that are incredibly analog to the one that you're asking someone to come into. Now, someone who understands private equity well, someone who understands the expectation of the sponsors, someone who they are often able to get off to a much faster start.
Right.
They are often speaking a language that is common and shared right from the beginning. And there's a lot of learnings that someone, might not need to necessarily repeat. So, they can be there can be some advantage. When you're looking for a fast start, you're looking for fast impact. If you have someone who sort of already knows some of the playbook. The watch out that you have to be careful for is if the playbook actually needs to be different,
right,
or if the environment shifts and changes and requires a new playbook, do you have a leader who can listen, can be self-aware,
right,
can contextualize how the situation is different, has the ability to adjust and be agile to ensure that they can be successful in a new situation that requires a new playbook.
Yeah.
So you're almost looking for two things at the same time, which is, if you can find someone who brings analog experience, can speak the same language, can get off to a fast start, but can also be agile and learn and grow in the role, that to me is a winning recipe.
Yeah, absolutely. So, public CEOs, they complain that a big part of their job is managing shareholders. And a lot of the times they can't do things because they're a public company versus a private company. What percentage of a CEO's job that works for a PE firm is managing sponsors? And can you talk a little bit about, what are some of the additional barriers they have versus what are some of the metrics that they're more relaxed on when they're a CEO of a PE firm?
There are many examples of CEOs who know their business and don't know how to or have not successfully managed the stakeholders of their ownership groups. Or by that I mean they haven't brought the private equity, oftentimes they haven't brought the private equity sponsor close enough to understand the challenges that they're working through. And so it can be twofold. It can be either a lack of communication and alignment or a lack of transparency. And so sometimes I've even found that the CEOs don't feel the psychological safety to share, here's what's going on, here's what the challenges are, here's why we're not performing.
Yeah.
So they present
a rosy picture,
a story, and in reality, what they really should be doing is bringing the ownership group into the problem solving, which, they don't need to be the hero. They need to create that team dynamic of how are we going to solve this problem? How are we going to win? And so, there's sometimes some of the work that we're doing is coaching CEOs, and I don't mean coaching them on how to do their job. I mean coaching them on how to work with different parties to ensure that dynamic enables their success. So yes, both private equity and public company CEOs have their own different but related sets of challenges around aligning investors or aligning expectations. I think the difference with public companies, of course, is you're also managing a public perception, and you're managing the expectations of shareholders who are not in the ownership trying to problem solve with you, and oftentimes those perceptions are being shaped quarter to quarter, as opposed to over a 5, 6, 7 year period. And so the dynamics that you're juggling are quite different. There are some CEOs that we know in public environments that are masters at communication. They're masters at understanding how to actually leverage the investor relations community to drive the objectives that they're trying to drive. So it's a skill set, it's a competency.
Yeah.
It's one that can be developed with great communications professionals and outside coaches. I mean, it's a craft and an art. And there are other CEOs that really struggle with that. We sometimes find that first-time CEOs for a public company, that's an area where they haven't been trained.
Yeah.
They've done all the other things to run the business,
Right.
but this is a new area for them, and it's often a place where boards can really enable their success by ensuring they're getting the right support in an area that would be new to them.
Yeah. On the topic of first-time CEOs, because there's so many aspiring first-time CEOs, you co-authored an article a long time ago in which you talked about how first-time CEOs can actually be more successful than repeat CEOs. Can you talk to that a little bit, especially for the aspiring first-time CEOs?
Yeah, I mean, yes, you're. By the way, any pause or smile I just gave is because when I was transitioning into my role now, I went back and reread all of my all of articles. Yeah, I got to take my own medicine. I think some of what I was referring to earlier about not necessarily having a playbook can sometimes be an advantage.
Mm.
The things that you might be bringing to the role as a first time or as a new leader is an inquisitiveness that sometimes you might not have if going back into the same role for a second time. So if you go into something assuming you don't know the answers, you might have a point of view, you might have a conviction, but you want to test it. The amount of information you're absorbing, the amount of adjustment that you're making is often real time. And I do think there's also an element where the people around you may forgive you for not having the answers.
Yeah.
And so at least this was actually has been my experience the last 2 years, which is, it's been okay if I haven't known.
Yeah.
And actually it's been refreshing for me to know that my colleagues and partners and board members are comfortable, kind of problem solving together and trying new things together, so long as we're being honest about if it's not working or something isn't right, addressing it, and then applying the learnings to doing it again if we think it's the right thing, we just didn't do it the right way, or saying actually that wasn't the right thing. And I do hypothesize, this wasn't part of the research, but I do now in my own experience, I do hypothesize whether or not I'd have that same permission if I got, asked to do a role similar to this one. People would expect that I have the answer.
Yeah.
And so there is in some ways some advantages to being new.
So on the subject of being inquisitive as a CEO, I have a comment and then I want to move into talking about that. So when we first met for dinner, the thing that absolutely moved me about you was when I was telling you something about AI, you immediately took your phone out and you started taking notes. And then during the whole dinner, you kept doing that. And it really made me realize that you were learning. You used that opportunity as learning, even though you have more things to maybe teach me than I had to teach you. And ever since then, I now adopt that. So I use that in my meetings as well. Like I actually take my phone out and I start taking notes. So what that did that for me was, one, it made me feel really heard. Like I had no doubt in my mind that you heard everything I had to say.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that practice? And then I want to start talking about, you in the CEO role.
Sure. Well, that practice definitely started as a habit from being a young person doing CEO recruiting and CEO succession planning, where I was meeting incredibly experienced people, judging them, and not having remotely the same kind of experience or expertise that they had. And what I found was in every single meeting and every single conversation, I was learning so much from them. And so I formed a habit of, I take a lot of notes. I refer back to those notes all the time. I genuinely became a student of the clients and candidates that I was working with. One of the best things I have in those notes actually is I have quotes. And so when I hear something that I just think is a gem, it's a pearl, I jot it into these quotes, and I attribute it so that I can remember who said it, where it was said. And it's one of the things that I actually love looking back at. If I get on a flight and, during the announcements where I've heard a million times, I'll sometimes just go through it and I'll page through it. And oftentimes I find something that resonates to a problem or something that I'm working on at the moment. And it's just, it creates a little reflection. Thank you for telling me about your experience.
No, that was great.
Yeah.
I heard about Mark Zuckerberg when he first became CEO. That's what he did. He had a diary and he, walked around everywhere. And I'd never taken notes in my life. And I thought, oh, Mark Zuckerberg does it. But actually, does any CEO really in practice do that? Because it's so awkward to do that.
Yes.
But when I saw you do it, I was like, how does that actually made me feel good about our relationship right away. And also it was great. I think it was a great lesson. And so I started doing it. So thank you for that.
Yes.
CEO role, it's almost 2 years. Talk to me about from managing a practice to becoming CEO, and more specifically, I want to zoom into the first 100 days of when you became CEO. Tell me about those first 100 days.
First 100 days were very special because on so many dimensions and on so many levels. One is the clients that I had worked with for a long time, my close client relationships. I didn't know how they would react and how they would respond. And, I had just an amazing amount of support from them, both in terms of some feeling like they took some credit for helping make me into a success at Spencer Stuart. And I think acknowledging that both of us had learned a lot from our work together.
Yeah.
And so genuinely, they deserve some credit, for sure. But also in, sticking with me and the firm through a transition where my work and the nature of my work with them has shifted and changed. And they've been great thought partners in how to manage through that. So there was a client element in the first 100 days around, okay, the relationship and my work with them is going to change. I'll still be with them, but the nature of the work would shift in terms of my involvement.
Yeah.
So that was a part of it. 2 was sort of just also figuring out from a lifestyle perspective, how things would actually change for my family. And I didn't really recognize, just some of the sacrifice that comes with that. I've got 3 young children and a wife, and we're all very close, but I'm, pretty much, traveling now three weeks out of the month. And so it's a lot of time on the road, in different offices, at, different conferences, meeting with clients in different ways. And so there was an element of, okay, well, there's, how does my rhythm, shift both on a personal and professional standpoint. And I guess, so that's, a client and a personal and then I think a third in that first, 100 days was really, okay, team. right? How are we going to, what's going to shift in terms of the team that I'm working with from a Spencer Stuart leadership team, office leadership, practice leadership. Most of those shifts were things that I believe in a partnership model should happen anyhow, right? And most of our leaders are partners in the firm, and there's service roles,
right?
And people come in and out of leadership.
Yeah,
they lead in one thing, then they go back to client work, then they lead in another. Most of us are, doing lots of different work on the side of our day jobs and teaming up together, and so. But you want to go through those transitions in as healthy as a way as possible, and so that was an element on my mind, and then I guess reaffirming our values.
Yeah,
when you have a leadership change, that can often mean, okay, you're going to have a new strategy or you're going to operate differently. One of the things that you asked me earlier about was what kept me at Spencer Stuart, and there's a values here and things that we care about, right? Diversity, inclusion, being global, working collaboratively, caring about people when they're having tough individual moments. I mean, there's things about the way that we work that I really wanted everyone to know those are never going to change.
Yeah.
And the spirit of our private partnership, and wanting more people to aspire to be in that partnership, was something that I really hope I conveyed to people and reassured people that you can change strategies, you can expand the business, you can do new things, you can be innovative. But there were certain things that we weren't going to compromise on or go backward on, and let's find ways to move forward on. So those were things that in my very first moments that I was focused on.
Absolutely. So it's funny, I think we've met in 3 different locations now. This is the 3rd time we're meeting. The second time we met in Dubai.
Yes.
And you were traveling to Dubai.
Yeah.
And I was telling you about how many days I've spent in a hotel room. And then you told me about your time, and I immediately took a step back. I was like, wow, I thought what I was doing was already unbearable, but what you were doing in terms of travel is enormous. Can you tell me, why is it so important to travel? You're the CEO now, but why as a CEO role do you take that upon yourself? It's so hard to be away from family and work and traveling. It puts a lot of burden on your body as well. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. Well, and I haven't even gotten to all of our offices yet, but it's coming, and that's a goal of mine. I do want to get to all of our offices and all of our people, and that is for a few reasons. One is I learn, and I learn more about our business in every location that I go to. In many ways, we're a portfolio of lots of different businesses. We're doing the same things. We're delivering the same services. We have the same high quality people. But what I have found is every single market has its own competitive dynamics. It has its own culture and operating histories. And when you're there, you learn so much more about the challenges that our teams are facing, the opportunities that our teams are facing. Sometimes you get information that you wouldn't normally get. You pick things up at dinners, at breakfasts, in the hallway that you wouldn't necessarily hear in a video conference. And And so those are some of the reasons that I think being in person is important. I always try to visit clients or do something external in the marketplace while I'm visiting, because again, it gives me perspective into our competitive landscape, competitive dynamics, gives me a better sense for what clients want and need in different markets and how they're perceiving Spencer Stuart in relation to the global ecosystem they're working within. So that's always of value. Hopefully it demonstrates the level of care and importance that we place in them. And same for our people. It's not cliche to say that our people are our most important asset, and that's sincere.
Yeah.
So wanting to know them, wanting to know what's happening is it's like a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. There are two themes that continuously keep coming up when I talk to different people at Spencer Stuart. I asked David Baruch, when he interviewed at Spencer Stuart, why did he take the job? Because he worked at a much larger firm, controlled a much larger budget. He said every single person that I interviewed was phenomenal. So that theme keeps showing up and up again. The second theme, and then the question around the second theme, is that this is a really old firm. But yet,
yesterday was our 70th anniversary. Truly. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
70 years. That's enormous. Most companies, tech companies, have the average of, 20, 25 years. So Spencer Stuart has clearly kept re-innovating and rebuilding itself. There's this culture of innovation. But where I'm dumbfounded a little bit is it's a partnership. And in a partnership, you have all these people that, are their own little mini CEOs. They're running their own little practices. So as the CEO of a partnership firm, how do you drive change? How has Spencer Stuart continued to drive change and move in that direction?
Yeah. It goes a little, I hate to be repetitive and go back to something I said earlier, but the alignment of energy. Again, I would underscore it's incredibly important. Trust. Trust. People need to know and understand that the folks that you're working with are trying to do what's right. What's right for clients, what's right for the firm, what's within our shared value system. So there's a lot of communication. There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of building alignment. I think one of the things that I've been just delighted by over the last 2 years in particular is there's a lot of people who would say, in a big firm where it requires that kind of alignment and that kind of communication, you're going to run into bureaucracy. You're going to run into things that are slow. And what I have been so thrilled by over the last 2 years is how much everyone has leaned in to change, and an openness and a willingness. And if I had to have predicted anything, it would have been, why wouldn't a large, successful firm be, more reticent around change? And that has not been, it's not been what I've found with our partners. There is a strong desire to win. There's been a strong desire to serve clients in new ways. The ambition level is high. And so that's been exciting. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, clearly, Spencer Stuart, word on the street is you guys are doing phenomenal. Speaking of change, this is an AI podcast, so we have to talk about AI.
Yeah.
Tell me about your thoughts on how you think AI is going to impact our industry.
Yeah. So when I first started to experiment with AI, and when I first started to lean into, what does this mean for me as a practitioner, or what does this mean for how I use AI in my everyday life, to what could this mean for our firm and profession, my immediate, instinct was more around individual productivity.
Right.
And we can talk about individual productivity because I do think, AI has been already a big enabler of the productivity gains that Spencer Stuart has made.
Yeah.
And enabling the capacity of our people to do more. And so that's really where I was focused at first.
Yeah.
But that focus has kind of shifted to now starting to imagine new ways of connecting information and fact patterns in ways that we haven't historically been able to do.
Yeah.
My thoughts have shifted to changing work process. And actually fundamentally rethinking workflow and how we do some of our processes. And in those sorts of, in that context, you get much more transformation and you start to think about ways where you can get enterprise productivity, not just individual productivity. And so, those are big shifts. Those are big shifts that I think don't rely on, of course it relies on technology, but it also relies on culture change. It relies on adoption rates. It relies on change management processes. So there's a lot of elements that go into fundamental shifts into like the ways that we work, the ways that we collaborate, and the ways that we can harness the benefits of the technology and benefits of AI. For that reason, I actually think that some of the transformation that people predict could take longer, could be harder than some people love a great soundbite and they want to promise the world to people. And in reality, I think that the transformation is real.
Yeah.
But how you get there and what needs to come with it will be a journey that requires money, time, and all of our people to like lean into. And so I think there's going to be a lot of exciting changes, but where I get most excited about is if we can get and capture and harness individual and enterprise productivity.
Right.
What it allows us to do is spend more human time building relationships, more time collecting proprietary insights that you can't get through data sets and technology elsewhere.
Right.
And that we can be even more valuable in multi-stakeholder processes and in the insights and judgments that we're dealing with every day in high stakes moments and high stakes decision making, and that we can have more insightful decision support based on the information and insights that we can glean through connecting assessment data, culture data, performance data. And so that's where that's where we're going. I think that's where the profession will go. Just two other thoughts that I would add to that is there's so much knowledge and information and data that we have access to.
Yeah.
Both public through subscriptions, but then also proprietary. And our ability to access that swiftly and be able to use that to help inform client decision making, and to to me that's where the magic is going to be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The other thing I would just say is a thank you to you for the partnership that we've created. We have been early investors in QLU, and our view for a long time has been, if we can find ways to access more information and aggregate it in ways that allow us to find the right people faster and form and create insightful views on them faster, it's a critical part of our work, and you've been a great thought partner in how we do that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yep. Very grateful. You guys took a bet on us when we were a very small firm, and if you guys didn't take that bet, we would have probably not existed, and we probably would have not been able to be as focused on executive search as we are right now. We've probably had to get diluted because it was tough to be an AI that just serves executive search. But I was excited about executive search. And so thank you for, giving us the opportunity, a very small firm at that time, now a much larger firm, but a very small firm at that time.
That's great.
Final question. 20 years from now, when you look back, Jordan Brugg, CEO of Spencer Stuart, what do you think you want your legacy to be?
It's interesting because, in some ways, I don't want my legacy to stand out that much. I'm the 10th managing partner, and I can think of the different sort of periods of time that each served in. And, every transition we've had have really been a builder on what the last person has done. And I'm very close to all of the managing partners that are still living. And I feel like the kind of the legacy that we're creating is kind of like a continued journey on the others. And so, what I'd really like is whoever takes over and whoever is the successor next will feel like the things that we did in my tenure were enablers to what they're doing. And ultimately, where we see the firm is being, the key or one of the most essential business advisors at the intersection of strategy and leadership. And the areas that we're helping organizations create success around is how they steward their business with great governance, how they accelerate value creation or achieve their objectives through organizational effectiveness, through executive success, through really well-functioning business leadership. And the journey that we're on is how we become more holistic business partners in that regard. How do we align ourselves around client outcomes? How do we not only deliver the best individual advisors, but the best teams? How do we create the best technology to enable the work that both we're trying to get done on behalf of our clients? And, I could easily give you a list of financial goals and objectives that I'd love to see happen. But at the end of the day, I hope that Spencer Stuart continues to be the most special professional services partnership in our profession, and that the people who are leading the firm at that point can look back to this era and say, wow, that was a period of time that we really accelerated the journey that we're on.
That's really well said. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Thank you.
This was awesome.
Yeah, it was great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.